Hello, I guess I'm live with my webcam that doesn't really work that well. But anyway, I'm going to sit here and wait to see if anybody comes over and asks me questions. So there's a little comment box section over here, and you can ask me anything you want about theology, about biblical studies, so anything in that realm. That's what I'm here for. I'm just going to look into the camera until somebody shows up and starts asking me questions. So ask away, and we'll see what happens. I don't really have anything planned other than to sit here and be stupid. So I'm bored. I drink these all the time. Kombucha, GT's brand is the best. It's good for your gut health, for your immune system. And we all need that nowadays, right? At least we become aware of that more in our day and age. So again, here I am. I'm waiting. Bobby the Athanasian, I go by now here on my YouTube channel. Really, that's following Thomas Torrance, one of my favorite theologians and teachers, and somebody I look up to. And somebody asked him one time if he identified as a Bartian because he was a student of Karl Barth, as many of you know. And he said, no, I'm an Athanasian. So, and that's really kind of his orientation is patristic theology. That's where he did his PhD dissertation. Some of it under, actually, it was with Barth that he studied, and he worked on the Grace and the Apostolic Fathers. So if you can get your hands on that little book of his, it's little relative to some of his other books. It's an interesting read. It gives you insight into his thinking early on and how he understood the patristics, the church fathers. So anyway, yeah, that's just something, a tidbit there. I'm still waiting for people to come and start asking me questions. I should probably do Facebook Live instead, since I'd have an immediate audience that way. But I'm gonna do it like this and see what happens. So I'll stay here for a little bit and just wait and see what I get, if anything. I realize it's not really good timing, but it's one of my days off. My days off right now are Wednesdays and Thursdays. Not the best days off, but they're days off nonetheless. In the industry I work in, if you get 2 days off in a row, it's a good thing, which is kind of sad, but it's how it is. So let me move back here a little bit. Yeah, I know it's kind of dark too. Look at this camera. And this webcam, I don't know. I hope it's coming through okay. It looks a little grainy. It looks better than it did the other night, though. But I still see a little graininess going on. So if nobody shows up, I'll probably just end this. And, I'm willing to debate somebody just for fun. So if you want to show up in the comments, you don't agree with me theologically and you know it, just post something in the comment section to kick it off, and we can have a little dialogue that way as well. I'm not squeamish about jousting like that, and I kind of like it. So it's kind of fun to me to do debate and things like that. Things oftentimes, of course, online get heated and go sideways really fast. But I think with a proper perspective, even that's okay. But I think a lot of people are very sensitive. I mean, I'm sensitive too. I'm not going to say I'm not. I mean, I can get snarky and all of that too. But I don't really take it personally, even though it might seem like I do at points, but I don't. And I still consider a lot of these people I disagree with brothers and sisters in Christ. And I'm all up for the joust, so to speak. So, Anyway, so far nobody. This is bad timing, I think, too. 5:30 in the evening on a, what is today? Thursday. So most people, at least in the United States, who might be watching or potentially could watch this, are probably on their way home from work, getting ready for dinner, things like that. So I know this is bad timing. I might just start talking about some issues I have on my heart, anyways, theologically. And but I'm gonna ramble a little bit. I keep going back and forth here to see nothing. Okay. I see Derek Peterson, a friend of mine, just got a book called Karl Barth, A Life in Conflict. I know you can't see me right now. I'm over here on Facebook. I don't have StreamYard or whatever to have dual screens or whatever, side screens. Yeah, Karl Barth, A Life in Conflict, Christian Tietz. Christian Tietz is the scholar who got me into so much trouble with the Barthians. Um, the Barthians of a certain ilk, I should say. When I got into Bart's relationship with Charlotte von Kirschbaum, and that really hit me hard after reading her essay, revealed uh, which revealed his relationship with Charlotte through love letters that they shared back and forth with each other. So yeah, that's a constant burr, and it's kind of, it keeps things in perspective, I think, as far as um, how we're all sinners. How Bart was, he basically lived in that sin. So that's something, yeah, that I still deal with personally, because I appreciate his theology so much. So it seems there's some dissonance there with that. It's problematic, and um, but yeah, I think I might pick up that book as well, the one that Derek just got. I knew about that book, but I think I might pick it up too now. So, well, I might have to do a Facebook Live instead, or do this StreamYard thing, which I can do a YouTube Live and Facebook Live at the same time. So I need to figure that out still. Um, Looks like I have 2 viewers. Let's see if I can see who they are. That doesn't say. If you're watching this, go over to the comments and say hi, so I know who you are. Please. That way I don't feel so alone and weird sitting here talking into a computer screen. Oh, there's Gilbert. Hey, Gilbert. Do you go by Gilbert or something else? Thanks for letting me know you're here, though. You just added a layer of pressure. I really got to perform now. Be at my theological best. um, but yeah, glad that we are in contact, uh, Gilbert, and um, okay, Uncle Penman. That works. Just like Uncle Carl. I'll call you Uncle Penman. So that's good. That's funny. Um, yeah, I am just going to sit here. I don't really have anything planned to talk about, honestly. So I'm just trying this out. I'm bored. It's kind of nice to have some downtime from work, and I don't feel like reading at the moment. So, although I do have books all around me, um, so that's fun. Oh, I have my supplies. See, I need to move that box back there. It's got all my supplies for work. I just got that. That's exciting. Um, but yeah, so here I am, still waiting for a theology question or something somebody wants to talk about or wants to bring to my mind, like Uncle Penman might have something to bring up. But that's funny to me, Uncle Penman. Oh man, online life is funny. It's actually kind of warm back here. Angela, if you're watching this right now, could you turn the AC up a little bit? A little bit. I'm a little warm back here in the room, bedroom here. So um, let me think of something I might talk about here on theology. I have lots of things to talk about, as you know, on theology, and not very many people to talk with about it. So that's why I'm online so much. In real life, well, just time schedules, trying to meet up with people in real life is almost impossible, especially with COVID. I just went into our grocery store for the first time, not wearing a mask the whole time. I was like the only one. So that felt Athanasian, very like contra mundum against the world. And but Governor Inslee here, Leader Inslee here in the state of Washington, has declared that we are going to follow the guidelines now being suggested by the CDC. So if you've been vaccinated, you don't have to wear a mask in public places anymore. So I'm pretty sure I had COVID, but uh, so I have the antibodies. So I presume that's probably even better than the so-called vaccines. Okay, Uncle Penman writes, the Bruce Ritchie book on TFT is good. Will you buy, read, or review at some point? Yes, I will do that. I'm going to do that soon. There's so many. I have so many books going right now. I need to rein stuff in here a little bit again because I've kind of gotten out of control. I'm in this ongoing reading project through the Church Dogmatics with Bart, of course. I mean, I've read, like I've said, I've spot read parts as needed over the years, but I've decided to finally just read it straight through, which I'm in the process of. So that's always ongoing and always kind of overwhelming in a way, because it's I'm on volume 10 of I think 30 or 31 in the study edition. So I have a ways to go yet. Um, I'm in 2-2 though right now on election, and so it's a good place to be. But yes, I do plan on getting that book by Bruce Ritchie soon, reading it and talking about it, reviewing it. I I have books now. I do have a book I'm supposed to be reviewing. I'm going to grab it right now and just show people what it is. Hang on one second. Right here still. Okay, so this book right here was written by a friend of mine, a person I know like in flesh and blood, not just online. This is his book, and it's backwards in the screen, but it's called Fashion Theology by Robert Cavolo. And so it's an interesting topic, and I'm supposed to be, this is what my primary review book right now that I need to be reading. It's not even that long. So I need to get through this and do a review on it. I have like 8 other books, review books I've gotten, like some of them like 3 years ago. And I was supposed to write reviews for them for my blog, and I haven't. So I'm behind on book reviews. And those were actual review copies, some of them. Some of them I felt pressured a little bit to do them, but I won't get into that too much. But I need to write the reviews on those two first before I kind of get to Richie's book. And so, as you know, Uncle Penman, it's the making of many books, the writing of many books. There is no end, as the teacher says in Ecclesiastes. So yeah, much study is wearisome to the flesh, but so I'm weary all the time because I study quite a bit that way too, like you. But yeah, and I've been asked to go on. I don't know if you're still watching Uncle Penman, but I've been asked to go on the TFT book, or I forget what it's called even now. TF Torrance reading group, I think, by Marty Folsom. It's his group. I've been asked, like in this coming fall or autumn, I guess if you call it autumn, I call it fall, to go on there and talk about just my. Okay, you're still here. Thanks. let me know that. Yeah, I've been asked to go on that Thomas or TF Torrance reading group on Facebook where they do Zoom meetings every Thursday. So today they did one with Derek Peterson actually on his recent book on um, flat Earth and fake footnotes. If I got that order right on the title, but so they did one with him today. So I've been asked to do that by Mike Hebitz. He's going to do the interview of me there. And that would be in September, and basically getting into the stuff I did with Mike on evangelical Calvinism. So on Torrance's evangelical Calvinism and what we've done with that. So that would be interesting. It's funny when when people call me like a T.F. Torrance scholar. Yeah, I think it might be good to do that, Gilbert. But yeah, so I just find it's a little intimidating for me still because I've done all of my stuff basically on Torrance and Bart and everything that I've done online. Like none of it has been um, like an actual, physical settings with in like real lectures or with real life in-person face-to-face dialogue with people. I mean, I've met with people that I know here and there and we've talked about it, but not a lot. So yeah, to go into a group like that with a bunch of TFT scholars and then to be considered a TFT scholar myself, um, or to be, yeah, to be asked like that under those premises is a little intimidating for me. I mean, I know Torrance's theology pretty well. And so I spent a lot of time with him. So a lot of time promoting him too online. So yeah, I know I'm associated with him. So yeah, that should be interesting, and I think I'm going to do it. But yeah, that won't be till September. So still about 5 or 6 months away from now. So that's a bit in the future. But yeah, I plan on doing that. Um, and it'll be mostly, I think, about the work we've done with evangelical Calvinism and Torrance and Bart Calvin. So that's something that's forthcoming. So yeah, I think that'll be good. Um, I let's see here. What else? Yeah, as far as I guess I'll try to come up with some things to talk about here myself. Um, I don't really want to talk about. Okay, what's this topic? I'm currently looking at the passability and impassibility of God, especially in 20th century theology. Have you done this publicly, especially in relation to Bart? Um, no, I mean I've written some blog posts, of course. I think I've written blog posts on everything over the last 16 years, but I haven't. I haven't done a lot of writing actually on that. I do think that the passability, impassibility teaching, like of course I'm not committed to. Should be clear. I'm not committed to like an Aristotelian or some sort of classical theistic understanding of impassibility. Um, Although I still consider myself classical theistic. So, I mean, as you know, Uncle Penman, classical theism is just, it's almost like a meaningless category at this point already in its recent usage as far as what it covers and what it's supposed to be, what its reference point is supposed to be. But yeah, there's classical theisms, and I'm definitely within that, of course, I think too still. But as far as the passability, impassibility teaching and thinking from a Terentian onto-relational, like a relational personalist understanding of who God is as triune, I don't feel constrained, I guess, of course, by the typical um, classical categories that way as far as impassibility. So I do think God is passable for us in Christ, in other words. So I think that there's a relational dynamic that these other the classical understanding of that doctrine can't account for. So again, that's why I am so excited still about Torrance and Bart and that whole mood, because I think that it provides a way to think about God that is still very orthodox, um, very classical in certain ways, but at the same time, it's willing to think God in such a way that allows him to be who I think he has revealed himself to be, which is relational and not under the constraints of some artificial categorization that we have constructed and superimposed upon the way we think we must think about God if we're going to be orthodox, so to speak. So I think there's lassitude in the way that we can constructively engage with those categories without falling into heresy. So, but yeah, I mean, I've read Barton Torrance mostly. I mean, I have read other people, like in surveys, things like that on modern theology in that regard, where of course a lot of that does fall into heresy, and it does make God something like the God of process theology or the God of panentheism or something like that. So, um, yeah, we want to, of course, I want to avoid that. And I think Torrance does a good job of that and thinking about God's passibility and his passibility in the sense of his ability to be relationally present to us in the person of Jesus Christ. So I don't think that we have to, if we use a language of passibility in that situation or in that with that understanding, through a Christ conditioned way of thinking about it, we don't need to um, uh, fall prey to this creator, making a creator creature distinction error that collapses God into creaturely modes of thinking of God in that sense, as far as him being contingent, I should say, on our on creation. So I think that we can avoid that if we think through a properly oriented Chalcedonian Christological categories that emphasize both his consubstantial natures, both divinely and humanly speaking. So I think that's the way I would think about passibility, impassibility. Of course, it's got to be through Christ and God in a God world relation, so to speak, and thinking about how God is capable of being relationally and personally present to his creation. And to me, the incarnation requires that. So the incarnation itself, yes, it's mysterious and it doesn't have the kinds of, there's no analogies for something like the incarnation in the created order. So it is unique in that sense. And so it has a sense of mystery to it in that regard. But I think that that is the place that we can think about God's being passible. And I think the cross, of course, um, kind of climaxes that in a sense, as far as his passibility, his ability um, to move, to have emotion, real emotion, to be really um, one with us in that sense. And that to me, that is mysterious. But um, I'm not committed to this, like this idea of impassibility, immutability, those doctrines, because I think those arise out of course, what you already know about me. But I think those arise out of this rigid monadic understanding of God that I reject. So, but yeah, so that is an interesting discussion to have. on his passibility and impassibility. And I look forward to seeing what you had to say about that too, Uncle Penman. And yeah, I'd be interested in knowing who you are looking into in that regard as well. So, um, but yeah, like off the top right now, I don't have anything profound to say about that necessarily, other than just to gesture towards the way that I would go about trying to parse that out from the reality of God's relationship to us in Christ and the incarnation, and trying to think God from there, of course, rather than the typical ways that we are told we must think God from a classical theistic, um, generally speaking, orientation. So I still want to be committed, of course, to orthodoxy, but I don't think that that signifies necessarily um, orthodoxy per se. In other words, to be committed to this idea that God is impassible under the conditions that is generally understood. So um, I think there's a way that we could talk about God being impassible, but in a relational way. But then that, to me, kind of collapses down into, like, gets us into what would be passibility. So, okay, Gilbert Penman says, I recoil biblically from the emotionless God of metaphysical theism. It seems rather alien to the scriptural witness. And I agree with you completely. I mean, that's my background too. So when the Lord got a hold of me, I grew up as a young Christian, a pastor's kid, son, and I grew up in the church. But the Lord really got a hold of me in about 1994, like really shook me up hard times, just intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, in every way. But as a result of that crisis in my life, I became a Bible reader. And I'm sure many of us, have certain testimonies that way, that how the Lord gets a hold of us in the way that He knows He needs to in each of our lives in individual ways. So for me, though, that's what I became. I became a Bible reader, and I've just been reading the Bible through and through and through and over again. I mean, I keep record of my Bible read throughs since I've been doing that since '95. So yeah, that is my disposition and orientation as well, Gilbert. And I do recoil from this emotionless God, and this idea that there's a bunch of like these anthropocentrisms in the Old Testament when we come across God showing emotion. Um, that of course that bothers me, because I know what the theology is behind that, and so do you, of course. So yeah, I do recoil from that, and that so when I came across, and that's part of what really had me open for Torrance and Bart, is because they also recoil at that. I mean, Torrance wants to emphasize the Hebraic understanding of God. I know that gets back into von Harnack's critique of the Hellenization thesis and things like that. But there's something to that. I think that's taken too far at points too, but there is something to that critique as well. And so that's where I go too. And that's what opened me up to Bart Torrance, because I found somebody that way I resonated with, and they resonated with me too. And I think it's because, especially with Bart and Torrance, because I know Torrance read his Bible all the time too. It doesn't always, I don't think it comes through as much in Torrance's writings and lectureships and things like that. Like if you're reading the dogmatics, you see Bart referencing scripture constantly. Like it's all over the place. Along with, I mean, that's what makes him like a modern day church father, because he's just completely operating in that like ad fontes, kind of back to the sources approach that the magisterial reformers definitely were working with, getting back to the scriptures and the original languages and the church fathers, the patristic theology. So that definitely comes through in Bart's writings, especially his references to scripture. And so that's why sometimes I feel like I gravitate almost more to Bart than Torrance, it's because of that component or that element in his writing. But that's not to say that scripture isn't just as much in the foreground in Torrance's thought as well. But I think they also, along with us, Uncle Penman, recoil at um, this notion of an emotionless God. And so, yeah, I reject that. And so, if that makes me a proponent of God's being passable, then I guess it does. But to me, that's just a kind of ad hoc. Um, it's just presupposing that this other notion or way to think of God from this classical theistic frame is the orthodox understanding. And I don't think even the history itself bears that out theologically. Um, I mean, that might have become the dominant understanding of how we identify Orthodox theology, that God is impassible, immutable, pure being, actual infinite, unmoved mover, Aristotelian Thomistic understanding of God in that sense. But that is in the broad spectrum of things, that's not the only alternative within the history, and you know that better than me, Gilbert Penman. But yeah, so yeah, I recoil at that too, and so yeah, I know that people who would read me or engage with me would think, oh yeah, Bobby totally believes God is passable. But again, I think that's using their own ad hoc, that's how I would see it, categories for thinking God and imposing those on me. So, and whatever, I don't really worry about that too much. Okay. Okay, so you write Uncle Penman. I'll just keep calling you that because it's funny to me. I was much helped some years ago by the conservative Scottish theologian Donald MacLeod on passability. He was not in the TFT, etc. camp. Yeah, he's kind of critical of TFT, but had moved towards them on passability. And I haven't read him on that, so I can't comment on him. But I'll have to look into him. But yeah, I mean, I know he's kind of critical. He's actually pretty critical, as I recall, of Torrance in the main. But yeah, that's interesting to hear that he moved towards them on passability. So yeah, I'll have to read up on that too with him. I think I kind of was put off by him because of his critical stance towards Torrance. Same with Robert Latham. Uh, to me, he really butchers. Robert Latham butchers, from what I've read of him and his engagement with Torrance, T.F. Torrance. He really doesn't seem to even almost understand Torrance. It's kind of weird in a way because he's right there in that context, and yeah, those kinds of when I read some Torrance's critics, I think, have they really read Torrance? It's kind of a strange phenomenon that way. But yeah, I'll read up on him a little bit more here in the future too. But yeah, that's kind of why I haven't engaged with him very much, just because, especially when I heard about him, uh, I was hardcore reading Torrance, and so I was kind of put off. So I didn't really. If I'm thinking of the right guy, I think I am. He is the one he's very critical of Torrance, right? In other ways, if I'm recalling right. So, but yeah, but that's interesting to hear that. So, somebody else who's good is Jerome Ben Kukin in his book on his published dissertation. I have it over here in my pile somewhere. I won't try to, oh, there it is right there. Let's see, I'll grab it. This book, uh, Christ, it's going to be backwards. So Christ's humanity in current and ancient controversy, fallen or not. Did I read that right? Yeah. So Jerome Van Kuken. And here, I don't know if you've come across this book, um, Gilbert, but it's and he's also a personal friend. I mean, we've had lunch together a few times when he's visiting my area here. So we've gone out and hung out, spent a whole day together last time. But that book, even though it's talking about fallen or not, that issue and what in the human nature and what Christ assumed, um, he gets into these issues. It touches on this issue of passability. But okay, so you're right. McLeod spoke on God's passability at a famous conservative theology conference. He was asked who had helped him on this. He answered, "The man from Basel," shocking everyone senseless. That's funny. It's funny because that's how you what do you call him? The bloke from the Swiss bloke or whatever, which is funny to me too. But but yeah, that I from what I recall of hearing of him too, and I have read just I think I've read an essay or something in the past from McLeod. I think it was his critique of Torrance. Um, that would be shocking. um, so yeah, that's interesting. But um, I wonder how many people there are out there, really, who are afraid to openly declare their at least their respect for Bart's theology. I mean, I know in certain ways it's almost become played out in certain circles, especially like in my circles, like the evangelical world, or in our circles, in our evangelical world, but in my American context, I guess that it's for a time, anyways. Bart's theology, it was almost like trendy to be associated with Bart. It's kind of when I first was introduced to him in a positive way in 2002 in seminary. That's kind of how it was then. But I didn't really get into him until, yeah, like I've said before, about 2005, I really started to read Bart directly. I read more secondary literature on Bart than I did Bart at first. I mean, I read a lot of secondary literature of Bart, a lot of McCormick, Hunsaker, then Molnar later, but then others too. Um, Torrance himself on Bart's theology. So, yeah, that's and then, but now, I mean, I balanced that up now. I'd say I've read a lot of Bart directly now, a lot of his writings, and like I said, I'm trying to be one of the few in the world who has read all 6 million words of his church dogmatics. So in English. So yeah, I'm trying to remedy that, but as far as I make it balanced as far as my engagement with Bart, because it's kind of funny when you read so much secondary literature on somebody and then you actually read the person that literature is about directly. You almost feel like you have to start correcting the person themselves from the secondary literature that they don't understand themselves about themselves. So that's kind of a funny phenomenon as well, when you do that kind of stuff. And with Torrance though, so like on the other hand, with Torrance, I read more of him directly before I ever got to any secondary literature on Torrance. So it's kind of inverted there. Yeah, with Bart, more secondary literature first, with Torrance, more direct Torrance first. So it's kind of, I don't know why it even worked out that way as much in my reading and getting to know these guys that way, but it did. So, um, but yeah, that's kind of my background there with that. But so how long I've already been on here for 40 minutes. What the heck? Wow. Because rambling goes by fast. Um, but I don't think this has all been rambling. I thank you for the interaction, Uncle Penman, and about Uncle Carl. I quit calling Bart Uncle Carl. I used to call him Uncle Carl all the time. Um, but after the whole Charlotte von Kirschbaum thing for me, I kind of I didn't want to look at him as like this jolly old teacher of mine or something anymore. So I kind of quit having as much fun with that. But yeah, that's still that part with Bart will never be resolved for me exactly. It's always going to be a tension for me because but it's a tension because I don't know where else to go, honestly, theologically. And I don't feel like I need to anymore. I did at first, but I had to really just quit reading Bart altogether. Um, but I've kind of worked through that as far as being able to critically appropriate him and not at the same time. I'm realizing he wasn't perfect, like none of us are, of course, but to me, that's a rather egregious thing there. I wouldn't, if I would go to church, for example, with a pastor who I knew had a live-in mistress in his home. So that still remains when I bring it up in that in those terms. And I think part of it is because we have people like Luther and Calvin and Athanasius, all of us. I mean, there's things with all of these guys and gals in history where if we really knew what was going on behind the scenes sometimes, I mean, we wouldn't read anybody. And that's kind of what I came back to as well with Bart, that we're all sinners. And yeah, what he was doing there would disqualify him from being a pastor in a church right now. It should. Um, but he's dead. We have his body of work, and we can take it as it is or leave it as it is. So I think that the work he did, still in spite of his lifestyle, was able to bear witness to Christ in ways that other theologians haven't been able to. He did it uniquely. So, his Christ concentration is unique. Like, I don't know of any other theologian who attempts to remain um, orthodox, which Bart did, and so Christ focused in the way that he worked. So modern. I know, and that's the modern part that people get hung up on because they think it's all existentialist, Hegelian, Kantian, all the modern, of course, informers for Bart. They think that just completely ruins him. I think that he's too modern or something for some of these guys, especially. It's interesting talking about that on a ramble here. The Van Tillians out of Westminster Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It's ironic that they're so critical to me of Bart because because they're just as modern as Bart. Van Til was a very modern thinker, so I just find that way of critiquing Bart by the Van Tillian reading is is thick with irony because they are themselves very modern in the sense of Van Til's own philosophical orientation. So that's kind of an irony to me. That's why whenever I come across Van Tillians, like Jim Cassidy, who I've had many exchanges with online, who's their Bart guy right now. He did his PhD on Bart. I think Bart's doctrine of time and eternity. But he's like their go-to guy, on the Reform Forum side of things online. When it comes to Bart's theology, they all call him Bart a heretic when you listen to him. He calls Bart a heretic as well. And but man, the way when you listen to these Van Tillians talk about Bart's theology, I don't. If you know Bart's theology, you don't recognize who they're talking about. And oftentimes, I find not just with the Van Tillians, but with people who say they're engaging with Bart in general, especially in the evangelical, conservative, more that kind of world, reformed world. They say that when they're trying to make critiques of Bart's theology, like even Michael Reeves, and I like Michael Reeves out of Union Seminary there I think they're in Wales. But he has this thing on YouTube, like an hour long, like an evangelical engagement with Bart's theology. And I listened to that whole thing, and I barely recognized the Bart he was talking about. So I mean, that's kind of a consistent theme when you start getting into evangelical, conservative, reform engagements with Bart's theology. Is that there's this? I don't really know when they're saying they're engaging with Bart. I don't not understand like how they come to their conclusions about the Bart that they say they're engaging with. It's very, I don't get it, honestly. It's strange. They just assume that people are ignorant, I guess, and won't be able to identify their own ignorance, I would say, about Bart. You say Van Til for me is the theologian of unintelligible gibberish par excellence. I agree. Can't understand a word he says. Exactly. I mean, I read his books, his little one and his bigger one on Bart, and it was almost, I almost couldn't handle it. Like I didn't finish completely his big book on Bart because I couldn't deal with it. It was so, like you said, it's like unintelligible gibberish. Like I don't know how to understand that guy, and so he's very off-putting that way. And I know people say that about Torrance, which is too bad. I don't think Van Til and Torrance are on the same level as far as the way they communicate. Even like you can actually understand Torrance if you know church history, if you know historical theology. Well, everything that Torrance communicates makes sense. I mean, I know he can be cumbersome sometimes to read, and same with Bart. I mean, it took me a while to figure out their lexicons, but you can do it. I don't think you can do it with Van Til because I think he's fundamentally incoherent and in his theological offering. So uh, I agree with you on Van Til. And to me, that it's I almost get like this cultic feeling when I engage with Van Tilians that there's, and even like what Westminster Theological Seminary has become, it almost feels cultic to me because it's so idiosyncratic, and it doesn't really represent a Catholic Reformed theology at all. It's just Van Tilianism, and and I'm sure people could say the same thing about Bartian Reformed type people, but again, um, we'd have to talk about that further if they wanted to say that. But yeah, I I have a good friend, actually, like one of my best friends. Um, we started out together back in '96 at Calvary Chapel Bible College. I went there for a year in California, and it's kind of like just an ongoing retreat. Is what that college is like. You just have like it was actually not terrible um, for me in that period of my life. But my good friend, I met there, a roommate, and my best friend from there, Stephen. He after we left there, he really got into um, Westminster Reformed theology, and being in California, he's a New Yorker actually, but he stayed in California for a while after leaving the college there, and he got hooked in with Westminster the Escondido theology, the Westminster Seminary there, which there's just definitely this distinction between um, the original Westminster and that Westminster. But anyway, Michael Horton is there. Scott Clark. I'm not a fan of Scott Clark's at all. That's all I'm going to say as far as that goes. But he's there and other people. But my friend got hooked up with them, and now, but he moved back to New York. Now he's attending Westminster Theological Seminary in Pennsylvania, unfortunately, and he's totally into this Van Tilianism and orientation, and that saddens me. But I still love him. But it's just sad. I think that people, because I, of course, I'm a Bartian-ish guy, and so that places us immediately at odds. And the Van Tilians, the way they think about Bart though is like so inaccurate because it's based upon Van Til's misreading of Bart and like his gibberish, like you said. So yeah, it's too bad. I think how things work like that. And I was also turned off to Bart, not through Van Til, but probably more through Carl Henry and I guess Van Til is part of that because Carl Henry drunk from Van Til as well on Bart. How that was made popular really through Christianity Today back in the day, ironically, considering where Christianity Today is at now. Um, but that yeah, that definitely seeped through the whole evangelical ethos in America through Christianity Today, through Van Til and Henry's influence and their misreadings of Bart. So unfortunately, that is a leftover and in the culture, and it actually has real life impact on Christian fellowship and relationships. with brothers and sisters in Christ. So yeah, it kind of impacts my relationship with my friend even. So that's too bad. I once wrote a spoof about Cornelius Van Til in which I called him Egregious Van Grill, the cook at Westminster Cemetery. That's funny. Oh man, you're a funny guy. That's funny. I think that's hilarious, actually. Um, so I'm going to use that next time I engage with a Ventilian. We call him the egregious Van Grill. That's hilarious. Um, yeah. So Van Til's he's not for me. I wish he wasn't for anybody really out there. So there are a rare few really um, who are fans of Van Til, even in the Reformed world. Most of the classically Reformed people I've come across, like the Davenant Institute, which I know neither one of us really are fans of. Uncle Pillman, but I just thought of that. Uncle Penman. I know neither one of us are really fans of the Davenant Institute, but even those guys can't stand the Ventilians or Scott Clark for that matter. He's not even a Ventilian, but um, yeah. So I know out in the broader Reformed, even classically Reformed world, Van Til isn't really most people. Most of them don't like him either. So you have to. I don't know how you get into him. Um, it must just be through your church connections and the people who influence you that way. But yeah, that's funny. So okay, this has gone on now for 51 minutes and counting. And I thank you for these comments, Uncle Penman. At least it's giving me something to engage with here. I don't really want to bring up the provisionists and Pelagianism. I think let me bring this up though in relationship to that. For me, online, I've always, I mean, I have a heart. I've always had a heart for the church, for church people, and so I want them to get good theology. And so, like when I come across somebody like Leighton Flowers, so I guess I'm going to talk about this. When I come across somebody like Leighton Flowers, um, yeah, in my realm, and like as far as what I consider um, worthwhile theologically, yeah, what he's talking about isn't that at all. So, but for me, what draws me into those kinds of discussions and gets me focused on them is if a person like that is having impact on in the range of their impact out there in the broader evangelical world. So Leighton Flowers actually has in the YouTube world, in the online world, he has like 44,000 and counting subscribers on his YouTube channel. So he's actually making a real life impact. And I think he's providing an alternative to a lot of the disillusioned, young, restless, and reformed types. That's kind of what I see going on there a little bit with his appeal. And these people didn't even really understand. I don't think the Reformed theology they said that they were fans of when they're growing their beards out, smoking their cigars, growing their little man buns, and having craft beers. I don't really think. I think they were caught up in the culture of that whole movement rather than the theology per se. Not everybody, but I think that's in general that's true in my experience with that group of the young, restless, and reformed that happened maybe a decade ago. So, and now is petering out. So, but yeah, so now I see somebody like Leighton waiting in the wings with his Pelagianism, and that's really what it is. But I mean, they don't like that. These provisionists don't like to be called Pelagians, but in fact, historically, if we're going to look at them historically, like and what they're teaching, their doctrine, it's Pelagianism. It's not even semi-Pelagianism, and so I just think that needs to be called out still and engaged with, and so I try to do that as much as I can, and it gets into the online weeds, and I mean, I've had my fair share of being there. I try to avoid that kind of acidic, I guess we could say, online realm. But man, it's hard to avoid that when you're online. And making and you speak freely about theology and politics too, like I do. So it's hard to avoid some of the acidity related to that. And so I'm not afraid of that. And um, so yeah, so I will engage with people like him, primarily because I'm trying to offer some sort of online alternative to the bad theology that is being promoted by somebody like Leighton Flowers and his little proteges that he has out there in the YouTube world. So that's why I engage with people like him, because I think that they need to be called out theologically. And my problem, I think, in reaching people is that and I think what works for him to his advantage is that he speaks more at a popular and thinks more at a popular theological level, and that's not really my orientation. Like, I read too much, basically. And so by reading a lot of technical theology all the time, of course, that orients you in a certain way, and it makes it harder for me to like do the work, of making all of that so accessible. And and so I think really that's the appeal of somebody like Leighton Flowers, is that why he's reaching so many people is because that's where he's at himself. I don't consider him really a deep theological thinker. And so, but I think that kind of resonates with the broader church and churches, the evangelical churches, because people haven't really been um, given kind of like rigorous theological instruction in the evangelical churches. And so that works for someone like a Leighton Flowers. And it kind of militates against somebody like me or Uncle Penman or somebody who kind of inhabits a more theologically deep world that way. And so it makes it harder to kind of reach a broader range of people in the churches out there. So I know I need to work at that if I'm going to try to offer an alternative to something even like what Leighton Flowers is doing. But trying to communicate technical theological realities and concepts, sometimes those aren't, some people say, I know they riff off C.S. Lewis, because C.S. Lewis says, I wrote a post on this one time actually disagreeing with C.S. Lewis in regard to basically the idea is that if you really understand something, you can explain it in a way that everybody can understand it. So if you have this technical understanding about these deep theological realities and truths, that you can distill that in such a way that everybody can understand it. And that's just not true. That's just not how reality works. So I do agree that if you have a good grasp and understanding on a, let's say, a theological teaching or doctrine, that yeah, you should be able to communicate that in a general way where it makes it accessible to people potentially. But the problem is that there's such a range of audiences out there, especially in the real world and online. So to say that we should be able to distill every technical theological doctrine and teaching in a way that everybody can understand it just is not true, because the subject matter itself is resistant to that. So if the subject matter itself that you're dealing with resists being reduced to generalities and universally accessible communication, then that's not always the case. So in other words, we have to learn. And then one of my professors, Dr. Koivisto, Rex Koivisto, my undergrad at Multnomah, he would always say to people when he could tell they were stretching, they're going beyond where they're at and that they're learning, that he says, I like your altitude. And I think that's right. That I think people are the real problem when people come back and they say, and I've gotten this a lot actually over the years through my blog, that they just can't understand what you're saying. So maybe you don't even understand what you're saying because you can't communicate it in understandable ways. But my comeback to that is, well, what I just said, but also my comeback to that is that people need to be willing to put in the work themselves and learn to think higher than where they're at right now in the stretch. I mean, I'm just like anybody else out there. So it requires work and learning. Learning takes work. So I don't really feel the burden always to try to reduce these high theological realities and truths to levels that everybody can understand. I expect people to make the effort to stretch and to learn too. And that's kind of been my philosophy, I guess, and why I don't always try to do that. Because for one thing, I think some things are resistant to being reduced that way. And in other instances, even if we can reduce them in certain ways so that they're accessible, sometimes I think by way of doing that, it doesn't challenge somebody to learn, to stretch, and to grow intellectually even. And so I think that's kind of been the problem in certain ways with the evangelical world, that everything is supposed to be dumbed down, and there's this assumption that everybody's a dummy out there. But I don't want to operate with that assumption. I guess I kind of think of myself and just think of where I was when the Lord got a hold of me and where He's brought me. And it's been years of study, years of reading, years of reflection, years of real trial, even that way. And but I just think that anybody of average intelligence, honestly, if they're willing to learn and not lazy, um, can understand a lot more than they actually think they can. And that's really been my invitation to people through my blogging is, for one thing, I don't have the time. It takes time actually to try to distill things in ways that are always accessible to a variety of audiences out there. And so that takes work itself, like a lot of work and a lot more writing than I have time to do myself personally. So yeah, so for me with my blogging, my writing and things like that, most of that's been like, most of my blogging is really just as if you've read me for any time, you know that I'm just sitting there. I'll read something. I feel like everybody needs to hear this. It gets me excited, and I just put a big quote in there, big passage from whatever I'm reading, and then I offer my own little reflections on that. That's really the character of my blogging, my writing online has been that way for years. So that's one reason why I don't always try to make everything accessible, because to me, my blogging is a reflection of my learning personally. And I'm just kind of doing that in written form for the public to read along and learn along with me, I guess. So I have in the past, I did try to do some start a blog where I was going to intentionally try to make things more accessible and for me personally, try to be intentional about that and try to work at that. And then I just don't have the time to do that. It's really hard, honestly, to do that. I mean, if somebody wanted to pay me to do that, uh, where I could make a living off of teaching theology online, then yeah, then I put in that effort. But that's the kind of effort really required to try to distill things, technical theological things and realities in a way that are accessible for a greater part of the body of Christ out there. So that's really kind of a part of my thing online, is that really it's kind of selfish in certain ways, um, but I don't think so, because what I'm offering online is free. So I'm just offering my own thinking, my thoughts, and working them out loud, speaking freely online. So, and as a preacher, to be honest, I have found that some people's vocabulary is very, very limited, far more so than I would ever have dreamed, unsettling. And I agree. And I just think that just where we're at right now in the culture and societies at large in the world, it's very revealing. Like, it's scary to me how sheeple people are. That how, I mean, I don't want to be mean, but it seems like people, it just scares me. I mean, I agree with I know exactly what you're saying. It is very unsettling. That's a nice way to say it, about where people are at intellectually and spiritually for Christians. But just the capacities people don't have to think critically, just at very basic levels, even and the even discernment. that's something that I really find troubling too, especially among the class of that I often associate with, and that you definitely do. Excuse me, Uncle Penman. As far as the academic world, and all these guys and gals who have PhDs, and as far as sociopolitically, they're just right there with the whole group. And I know there's some vanity associated with that because I've thought about this even before this whole COVID thing hit as well, that that there's PhDs out there. It's like a quid pro quo relationship in that world. So I'll scratch your back, Mr. Scientist or Mrs. Scientist over here, and identify you as an expert, and then you can scratch my back and identify that I'm an expert too in my field. You know, it's that there's that kind of vanity, I think, among that class of people in the theological world too. And so they go along with a group think as much as anybody else because of that. I think I'm hoping that's kind of like my best, like my most um, charitable reading of why so many of these people who we have contact with in this world um, are so willing to go along with the group when it comes to what's going on in society right now relative to COVID and just the outright tyranny that's associated with that. Um, that boggles my mind. Other than just this, like, where is the discernment? Just spiritually speaking, where is the discernment here? Um, so yeah, it is unsettling. And so these people, and in that sense, people with these PhDs, master's degrees, or whatever they have, supposedly have learned how to think critically. But clearly, knowing how to think critically can become a self-referential engagement where that's only applied within the realm that they feel like they have expertise in, and in the realm that they want to think in theologically. But when it goes outside of that, it's just right back into the group. And so it's just I don't know. It's definitely disorienting to me and frustrating, really, because I feel like I've actually lost a lot of connections just because I speak freely and I don't follow online etiquette and I'm not dispassionate um, and things like that. So yeah, that is troubling to me as well on yeah on a whole variety of levels as far as just the popular, the academic, where is there's a lot of unsettling things that are being exposed right now um, at the level of just being able to think like critically about stuff in general and apply that in real life scenarios. That's unsettling to me. But just especially among people who supposedly are trained, have received training, and their degrees are contingent upon or presuppose that they know how to think critically. But clearly, knowing how to think critically isn't enough. There's more to this whole process of being discerning, and I think a lot of it has to do with our willingness to be different and not be part of the group. And so I think a lot of people in that world, the academic world especially, are unwilling to walk against that, to live against that, which is ironic to me because most of the dead theologians that we study and the reason that we know about them, I've always found this ironic too, is because they were people who did work against the stream, that they stood against the stream. And I mean, like Martin Luther comes to mind immediately. Athanasius, his Contra Mundum against the world comes to mind. And, I mean, Karl Barth comes to mind. Torrance after him. Bonhoeffer really comes to mind. So I just find that so ironic among the theological class, especially, that the people that they do their dissertations on would have been people who weren't part of the groupthink necessarily, that they want to frame them, they want to think them into or something. I don't understand that other than the vanity part of it. I think that's a huge part of that, really. So yeah, it's I don't get that. And that's just not who I am. Like, for me personally, I'm in this realm because I'm a Bible reader. Honestly, that's really what got me. That created like a reading ethic for me. Reading through the Bible created like this reading ethic that has kind of oriented and shaped my life when I read other books now. Um, it's just like a consistency, I guess, that comes from that. But it still comes back to the Bible. Like, and when you read the Bible, it's convicting. It convicts me. I mean, I'm encountering the living Christ as I read Holy Scripture, the Triune God, and it's real, and it convicts me about seeking the approval of others as my mode of Christian existence, so to speak. I don't want. That's not my goal. I'm not worried about being amened or yesed by this this PhD over here or that one over there. That's not my concern, and that's because I'm a Bible reader. So I'm committed to its reality in that sense. And I just don't see these examples. And so now I have a troll. I wanted to let you know that the three imperial ambassadors are Zenith apostles, and they want to come to the surface. Okay, good for you, bro. But so anyway, what was I saying before I was so rudely interrupted by the troll? Uh, but yeah, that's my orientation. It comes from scripture and just in its reality. So, um, so anyway, I'm thinking I've gone what, an hour and 12 minutes here, probably long enough. I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to look up Septimius the Destroyer and block him because I don't like trolls at all. So I don't do well with people like you. So you're banished as soon as I get off here. Figure out how to block you. But that's what I'm gonna do. But anyway, anybody else have any other real life questions? Yeah, I gotta go too. Okay, thanks for the engagement, Uncle Penman. And yeah, that was a good ramble. So, all right, until next time, I'm gonna hang up the YouTube channel here for now. I'm gonna go block Septimius the Destroyer. Peace, Pax, my my British uncle, and I'll see you online somewhere on Facebook, most likely. So okay, have a good one, and I will be dealing with the troll here, um, and I always enjoy that. So I am not shy about stuff like that. So if you irk me, um, I don't do well. So okay, I gotta go and gonna close this down. I guess hit end stream. I think next time one more word programming note. I guess I think next time I'm gonna try to use StreamYard and integrate this with Facebook Live and do it. And so then I'll have YouTube, and then I'll have an immediate audience on Facebook with my 1,200 friends, whether they want to see me or not. So I think that's what I'm gonna do next time, and I'm pretty sure I'll get more viewers that way, maybe some questions. But I do appreciate Uncle Penman and his engagement. So the Septimius the Destroyer is gone. You're out, bro. Okay, till next time. Peace.